we want to collectively get across to you tonight is how we are balancing our responsibilities under the law with our also responsibility to look after the heath. The two things have had to be reconciled by what we do. We want to demonstrate how we have done that. The ponds on the heath are big enough to be covered by the Reservoirs Act 1975. Therefore, we have to comply with that act. And what we've done is we've taken a global view of the heath and and actually altered the design so that we take into account each chain of ponds. So we haven't just dealt with the 3 ponds that are covered by the act, because we think that is better for the heath. A panel engineer who has to act in the interests of safety under the act has said the dams are at risk. We've done our own studies that also confirm that the dams are at risk. If the dams were to collapse, our studies show that persons downstream would be at risk. They would be at risk of dying. And therefore, we need to do something about protecting them. One of the other things the Act says is that if we do not do the work, the engineer can step in and issue a notice forcing us to do that. Therefore, the guide says that if a dam is in that category, it has to be able to withstand a certain level of rainfall. That level of rainfall is called the probable maximum flood. It is an enormous amount of rain. It is an amount of rain that we recognise and acknowledge will occur very, very rarely. But that's the standard that we have to comply with. Why are we complying with that standard? Well, I've explained that actually that's the guidance that's issued. But just think of the position that we'd be in if we didn't. We as a responsible authority, the City of London, if we were standing there and this flood occurred, and our dams had collapsed as a result of it, even though there's lots more water about, and we were in a position where our dam collapse had contributed to that flood, and the newspaper headline would be something like "Dam collapse contributes to the flood," then we'd be in a position that for us would be completely untenable. That's why we're taking this seriously. That's why we're following the guidance. That's why we're doing what we're doing.
Trying to do is to stop the collapse, but the dam is able to pass flows safely around the dam so as not to cause more death and destruction. Now, the other purpose of the project is to try and improve water quality. Some of the dams, the ponds, are used for bathing water, and therefore they don't come under the Bathing Water Directive, the EC Directive. We need to improve the water quality because they fail sometimes, and also to improve the ecological biodiversity for the system. It's protected by the Hampstead Heath Act. It's also protected by yourselves. It's a dearly loved bit of land. And so we understood very early on that we had to find out how to balance the various needs and wants of the stakeholders. There are very many. Many of the stakeholders have slightly opposing views. It's quite difficult to give everybody what they want. And we've got the guiding principles about maintaining water levels. That seemed to be one of the things that everybody agreed. They didn't want the water levels to be changed in the ponds. Fine. Maintaining the views and minimising tree loss, and that's what we've been striving to do once we've decided where to put the additional storage. Minimising the works, particularly on the upper end of the ponds, chains, because the chains at the upper end of the ponds are believed by most of the stakeholders to be the ones that are most natural looking, and therefore should be preserved more than the ones lower down where works will be more tolerable. Avoiding concrete, and reducing the frequency and volume of floodwater. That was a very important thing. What we wanted to do was to make sure that when we added storage and increasing the levels of the reservoirs, that we didn't increase any risk downstream of formal flow at the lower events. So what we've done is we've managed to ensure that the reservoirs will not spill as frequently. What we've done is we've dealt with them as a complete chain, each one. I will now look at the individual elements of that chain, starting with the stock pond at the top. For the stock pond, the proposed works, which you can see here, there will be a spillway on the right embankment for dams. If you look at an embankment down the right-hand side is when you look downstream. That spillway comes around the right-hand side of the embankment. It's in... Yeah, there we go, that's the spillway. It will cause some tree loss, but we've managed to make it, to shape it around the trees as much as possible to avoid the tree loss as far as we can. We've got some edge planting along the side. There'll be some desilting for water quality, and that's and the embankment itself weighs in the order of 500 millimetres. Increase the embankment, increase the capacity. A wide spillway, very flat, wide spillway, and the level of this spillway here is around about 0.7 of a metre higher than the existing lowest point on the dam, which means that it will spill less frequently. The chain is the Hampstead chain, starting with the Vale of Health Pond. It's quite difficult to miss myself. Again, we will have a spillway on the right-hand side, going round the corner. We have some various planting. We've got some desilting, the raising of the embankment along here using a curb, and a small raising of around about, I can't remember how much it is, 500 millimetres. And reconstitution of the paths, etc. Viaduct pond, how much viaduct pond is? 190 millimetres raising on the embankment, like that. Reinstate the paths. Spillway in this case is on this side of the embankment. It's a very narrow spillway, the water will flow around here. That's been moved several times in order to try and avoid the trees. Got some marginal planting, and that's pretty much it on that one. This is another major work. The catch pit is, again, it's a completely new dam, this one. It's hidden in the catch pit area, which some of you may know, the fact of drawing this area up here, which is quite heavily treed. The purpose of this is to provide some storage in the system. If you've got a large amount of water coming through the system, you can store some, you reduce the overall energy in the system, and it releases more slowly. And that's very efficient for managing erosion. This would be around about 100 metres long, from there to there, about 40 metres wide, and about 5.6 metres high. 5.6 metres, 20 feet. The location of this, the axis of this, has been moved many times in order to try and avoid as many trees as possible. There's particularly fine specimens of trees around here, which will be saved. There will not be that risk. There's some new trees we planted on the upstream side. There are quite a few trees, nominated as trees, that will be taken out by this work. Most of them are quite small and not specimens. Bob will probably talk about that later.
Can you explain what that is? Is it a building you're building there, or?
That is an embankment. So that is an earth embankment. The top is along there. This is the toe on the downstream side, so it follows the valley line. And this is the toe on the upstream side. Okay, does that help? Mixed bathing ponds. We have a slight raising on the embankments. The spillway goes right over the top of the embankment. It's got no trees on it now. Continue to have no trees on it. There's a small raising on the upstream side, about 500 mil. We've got some marginal planting and reinstatement of the path. Hampstead number 2, we've got to hurry up. Hampstead number 2, again we've got some marginal planting, some desilting. There is no external spillway in this one. This is actually a drop shaft, and the water will go down through a culvert and appear into the next pond down. So that is the only spill. There's no raising in this dam. Sorry, beg your pardon, got that wrong. There is a raising in this dam. 0.2 of a metre. It's very small. Okay.
How much did you say?
0.2 of a metre, 200 millimetres, 8 inches. Yeah, a fifth of a metre, 8 inches. Yeah. The final one is house number 1, where we're not raising the embankment. We're going to have a culvert in here, which is it's a letterbox. It's about 500 mil, half a metre deep, and about 6 metres wide. That's also been moved several times during the development of the design to try and avoid as many trees as possible. There are no sort of specimen trees that we removed here. We made it to come round this side to avoid any of the trees on this cathedral walk here. So that's really what we're going to do for these things. Water quality, talked about a little bit. It's very important for the whole process. There's a lot of stuff to be done in terms of marginal planting, soften the views, soften the sort of visual impact of this project.
We're not going to drain any of the lakes, ponds. Program headlines, we are, as I say, a year ahead nearly of construction, which is great. We're not usually involved this early on projects. However, we're now building the program up. And the main highlights are model boating pond we want to do in 2015. It's the biggest piece of work with water influence near it, water risk. So we're aiming to do 2015 model boating. To separate the work, the other major piece of earthworks is the catch pit area. And we want to do that in 2016, so that we're not doing both the large dams that take up the maximum area of the heath at the same time. We want to leave as much of the heath open as possible for the use. Using large barges with excavators, we're going to use suction and pump effectively the silt out ponds. During the pumping operation, you won't be able to swim in the ponds. And after testing, a week or so after we finish desilting and the water quality returns to the right level, swimming can recommence. So, absolute minimum period of the ponds being shut during desilting. Again, obviously the ladies' changing room. When we're replacing that, there will be a period where that one will be covered. Minimising deliveries. We're working again with Atkins at the moment to specify materials, that minimum deliveries. We don't want big lorries. We don't want to clog up the local roads. We don't want to make a mess of the footpaths across the heath, and we don't want to destroy the grassland. Earthworks materials. Clearly the embankments that Mike's described are huge earth embankments. We don't want to be importing lorry load after lorry load of clay to fill these embankments. And similarly, we don't want to be exporting lorry loads of silt off the project when we desilted the ponds. So working carefully with Atkins, we're going to do a cut-fill balance, and we're going to borrow the material from a borrow pit. We're going to dig some borrow pits, find the good clay, and then fill those holes in at the end of the day with the silt. And therefore, hopefully, we'll get a cut-fill balance and we won't be exporting or importing loads of loads of material.
And who are you and where are you from?
My name is Ronald Sutton-Smith. I'm chairman of the United Soils Association.
Yeah, okay.
I'm also now part of something called the 1871 Society, which exists to draw attention to and preserve the 1871 Hampstead Heath Act. Okay. And that brings me to the point. I think it's really interesting that, for example, Mr. Everett didn't mention that, as far as I know. Forgive me if I'm doing you an injustice in your presentation. And that's one of the questions that I think is central to this.
Okay.
Hold on. You know, why is there not proper consideration given to 1871 Hampstead Heath Act, which is very important? Nobody talks about the size of Hampstead Heath. It's only about 700. It's less than a square mile. I think it's about 3/4 of a square mile. It's not Snowdonia. It's not the Peak District. So things done there are important. So we don't talk about the scale. I haven't heard anybody talk about alternatives to building dams. There's been no reference, as far as I can see, to taking out insurance so far as property risk is concerned. We're talking here about a very low probability of 1 in 400,000 years. Now, when I looked at some research done by the University of Amsterdam on work they're doing on the polar lands, they're talking about risks of about 1,250. That is one of the things we really do need to discuss. Where on earth does this absurd 1 in 400,000
okay, well, I'm very happy to ask the team to answer that question.
Can I say it should be insured? I mean, I know that about finance.
Ask your question now.
I'm sorry, I maybe didn't make it clear that actually one of the main things that is in our mind is the 1871 Act. The fact we have to keep the heath as looking as natural as possible. We have to balance that, however, with the fact that we have to do these works.
Thank you, please. Let's not.
He says, guess what would happen if this happened? My position would be untenable. He's very worried about his position. Well, if this is the case, his position is already untenable because nobody has been warned who is at risk of dying, how they will die. Are houses going to be swept away?
Okay.
Will they be flooded up to the roof?
Okay, I understand. I can ask you to respond to that.
So what I want to know, may I please finish my question? You keep doing this. So let us stop. We are here.
Anyone else got a question in that kind of area about likelihood of risk or impact or maps? I can only take 2 more. So, because we only have a certain amount of time available, and I can't imagine that you've all got different questions. So,
the question is about the statement from the gentleman from the City of London about the dams needing to be capable of withstanding this event. To be honest, I don't know what that means. Does it mean they have to be able to withhold all the water in such a flood, or simply that they don't collapse? And if it simply means they don't collapse, is it really impossible with the brilliant engineers that we have here that the dams could be restored, maintained, rebuilt in their current form in a way which would prevent them from collapsing?
Clearly, these dams would not prevent a flood that affected the whole of London. And the risk of that, as I understand, is far higher than the risk of a flood in Kentish Town from rain that comes down through these various collections of ponds. Why is the City of London then not use the money that it's going to spend on this to work to to reduce the risk of flooding to London as a whole by improving the various facilities that there are around the city as a whole?
My point is, we are the ones who are legally responsible. That is true. So I'm the one that takes the can back if something happens. I am regrettably not responsible for the drainage across London. I have to concentrate the city's money on the areas for which the city is responsible. We do it in the square mile, and we do it here where we're responsible for the land of the Heath. That is, I regret to say, why we cannot spend the money elsewhere. We have no justification. It will be up for queries, I expect. But it is the reason why we have to spend the money on the Heath.
The panel engineer was saying that in order to create some safe outcomes, we would not be able to have trees on the embankments. That was not something that anybody wanted. It is not in keeping with the Hampstead Heath Act, which is again a guiding principle. So we look for different ways of ensuring that the dams would not collapse. That requires us to put the fuses in, if you like, what I call the fuses, the spillways. Now we want to make the spillways as soft as possible. We do not want to put concrete in there. So we have wide, what we call swales. And the whole purpose of the swale is that, as Giles has shown, you can make them look very unnoticeable quite quickly. Now, you may, I see you're frowning, you don't believe me, but that is what we've been trying to do. Can I just...
The question is, and please listen carefully this time, you said people were going to die if this catastrophic event occurred. And you're building these dams in case the catastrophic event occurred and your position would then be untenable because you did nothing about it. Well, you're currently doing nothing about it because you're not telling people that they are in danger of dying. You're not telling them how they might die, what this flood is actually going to be like if it occurs. Is it going to sweep away houses? Is it going to flood up to the first, second floor or the roof? What is this flood going to be like? Why will people die? How will they know when they're in danger of dying? And what precautions do they need to take? What are the evacuation procedures? Please answer. Thank you very much.
They would be at risk is because the flood would extend over a wider area. The way they would be at risk would be because there are lots of basements in the area and people would be in those basements and those basements would be inundated.
Thank you.
No?
Just, he's answering the question. Please show some courtesy.
What we what we needed to demonstrate was that over and above the impact of the rainfall, the dam collapse itself would add materially to that problem. And we have done that. Even if we, in a way, as I tried to explain earlier, the fact is, if the dam collapses, even if they did not add to that, even if the dam put people at risk and there was no other rain, the dam collapse is liable to cause people to be at risk downstream, and therefore we need to do something about it. That is the simplest explanation I can give you. I hope it answers the point you seem not to have had answered.
Years guidance says that they have to virtually eliminate the risk of a fatality. And the speakers have skirted around the key fallacy here, which is that on their own technical reports, certainly the ACON report of 2009, although they studiously refused to produce a real quantitative risk assessment which would bring this point out, is that on the basis of the extreme storm, which we are all so worried about, 1,100 people would drown downstream, all these unfortunate people, before the dams collapse. So why is it rational to do all these things to protect the 300 people, the marginal unfortunate ones, who hung around while the other guys were there?
Okay, so thank you very much.
My question, therefore, is whether he feels to be your responsibility and fear, and I understand that, whether he would welcome a court judgment that actually he didn't have that responsibility. There wasn't actually a legal responsibility and requirement to eliminate virtually this tiny...
And I just feel there is an Alice in Wonderland quality about this, as indicated by these questions. Why don't we just move the goalposts, the 400,000, the criminal liability, and the, and I also think, I do resent the tone that you're taking. You're using the future tense as though this were indeed already set, and I do believe there's a possibility of a lot of reviews. I did have another extremely interesting question, but I have forgotten it, so I will
My name is Mick Farrant. I'm from the Elaine Grove and Village Residents Association, and I am one of the people who are at risk of death. In 1975, the house I now live in, I didn't live in the country at the time, was flooded above my head, right? It was occasioned... Sorry, can you allow me to speak and not interrupt? That was caused by opening the sluice gate of the Highgate number 1 pond, right?
Have you got a question?
Yes, the question is that in 1983 or thereabouts, a very large cistern was dug under the heath at the bottom end by the Lido. What part does that play in alleviating any problems about surface water or runoff water from the dams?
What we're talking about is a 1 in 400,000 year possibility. Is that the case? Because if so, it's clearly madness to even be talking about it.
What we're looking at is the probable maximum flood, which actually does not have a probability associated with it, unfortunately. It is a physical constraint about what water can be contained in the atmosphere and how it can be released. It's a physics, or meteorological physics. What it suggests is that there is a massive amount of water which can be released. That is the probable maximum flood. We have not ever said that it's a 1 in 400,000 event. I will let you know where that came from. We would be making our judgment, we make our judgment based on whether or not a collapse of a dam would put people at risk. And that is then quite simply turned into the probable maximum flood has to be withstood, so the dam should not collapse. We were asked to do what is called a quantitative risk assessment, a QRA, which we did. We have done the QRA. It is a very ill-formed and ill-informed process. It does not form part of any decision-making. It does not form part of the flood Water Management Act, it does not form part of the Reservoirs Act. However, we were asked to do it to see what the marginal, the 300 poor souls, the marginal effect of a collapse would be. In order to work out the effect of a collapse and the likely death that could arise, what one has to do is weight, as is a multiplication of a probability of an event against the number of people who could die. So in a small event, like a 1 in 2 year, there's a 50% chance. If one person was to die, you would say there's 0.5 of a person. What we have to do when we get towards the PMF is we have to assign a probability. So we assign a very extreme probability. It could be 1 in 100, it could be 1 in 100,000, it could be 1 in 200,000, 400,000. It doesn't actually make a lot of odds because you're using that 1 over 400,000 probability to weight, to multiply the number of people who would be at risk. That's what it's for. It is purely a mathematical thing for calculating the numbers. We do not use it for making a decision. It has been bandied around as being the criterion. It is not a criterion. It plays no role in the decision. The decision is purely and simply, would people be at risk of death if a dam collapsed? Yes or no? If yes, probable maximum flood, you must avoid collapse. So that's, the 400,000 is actually a slight red herring. I'm sorry to say.
I'm a long-term local resident and a pond swimmer. And all these arguments have been made from hypotheses. You just yourself just said that the risk was entirely mathematically determined.
No, I said the probability used for calculations.
Yes, the PMF. Well,
can we, yeah, you've made your point, the gentleman has, I thought you were going to answer the question about the function of that was the reason why I brought you in, because there are other people who I said I would bring in.
Allow me, if you will, to get to it.
Please, thank you.
The events of 1975, which are frankly crucial to interpreting what might happen, have not been taken into account by these people. This gentleman asked a question.
Yep.
The question raised is what was done after 75 wasn't done by the City of London. Of course, they weren't even responsible for the Heath at the time. It was done by Camden and Thames Water. And the large structure that just the gentleman mentioned, which is a huge floodwater trap, of which there are two. One at the Lido, one opposite the end of Swains Lane, and smaller ones in Oak Village, which flooded so badly in 75, and other ones in Dartmouth Park, which flooded so badly in 75. Since that time, although there have been extreme weather events, perhaps not quite as great as 75, but pretty much that level, those areas, those vulnerable areas, have not flooded.
Great, okay.
Propose is actually to increase, to force the Hampstead Heath to retain far more water than even it retains hitherto. I cannot understand how, and if the words were used tonight, increasing storage and levels of reservoirs, how that actually is the way of addressing the problem of the risky dams.
What happens is each of those dams stores that water and the peak is reduced. The more storage you put in, the lower the peak flow from the chain will be. And that is the purpose of putting more storage in. It is not, I mean, we're not trying to retain the whole storm flow because that would be very large. What we're trying to do is reduce the amount of flow that goes from dam to dam as a peak flow to minimise the size of the spillways. So it's a balancing act between how much storage you have in the system and how much overflow capacity, what I call diffuse capacity. Okay, does that make sense?
Could you tell us, A, how safe we are at the moment from what's level of storm, and B, what we will be afterwards, and also how can you demonstrate that?
Since then, there's been an intervention with an underground storage and other pipes. Now, those three, I believe there's 3 pipes, one from the Hampstead chain, one from the Dartmouth Park chain, and one from the Hampstead chain. Now, they're not capable of carrying enough water. to go in those.
I'm sure all of the homes at risk for a quarter of the money being spent on the dams.
Of the Hampstead, the Highgate Men's Pond Association, which was set up about 18 months ago as a response to these works. And we have, I think you should know, that we have 550 people on our contact list who all support the position that we are in, which is we are totally opposed to these works. One of the questions I've got right now is that I think the key thing we've all got to understand here is that these works are based on a very spurious engineering criterion, which is a 1 in 400,000 event. Now, in living memory, and it's also based on total elimination of dam collapse. It's not based on trying to take measures which are practical, based on empirical evidence that we've got, like 1975, where we did have some flooding. It's not based on what the Thames barrier, which you mentioned, which is a 1 in 100 scenario, or 1 in 1,000, which is still considerably smaller than 1 in 400,000.
What we're talking about is commercialization, turning this into a nature reserve, and that's why the Act keeps on being brought up, because the Act was about the community. People, you know, we know the Women's Pond now has to pay, the men have defended against it. We think that's really what the agenda is. And unless that becomes clear, this is going to go on and on. I think we need a third party. I really need, the money needs to be put, they need to put a few millions into having a third party assessment that is not linked in any way to these people.
These people who are sat in their basements downstream, and can they not be warned for £15 million to come upstairs?
I didn't hear an answer to earlier, which said, yeah, we understand you're in a legal bind, you are in a legal difficulty here, you're responsible, and you could be in big trouble if this very unlikely event happens. And the question was, would you welcome a different opinion on that? I'm puzzled because I get a feeling that you're really keen to have this happen, but if I was in your shoes, I'd be going, oh, this is just such a nuisance.
Okay.
And I've half North London up in arms against me and all the rest of it. But you want it to happen, and I don't understand that.
Question resides in if, and I understand the project derives originally because the council members of the Corporation of the City of London will have been told they will be personally liable for any deaths if they don't build these dams in accordance with the way we've been told they decided to do it. And that being the case, I'm absolutely astonished, and I feel the whole meeting has a sort of surreal edge to it. If that was me in that situation, I'd be out there in the street, knocking on the doors of everyone who I thought might drown, warning them, person to person, face to face, this is the reality. If you live here, there may be a flood, and I would also be setting up detailed schemes to alert people well in advance before any flooding took place. And to fail to do that seems to me to be far greater piece of negligence, public negligence, than actually spending 12 million quid on decimating one city.
Well, I welcome a judgment. I welcome a judgment if actually people could demonstrate to me that we're doing the wrong thing.
Okay, I don't think we're going to get any further on that one. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry.
And if legal judgment really falls back on it. Yes.